President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. The chamber now gives the floor to the defense team for Mr. Kiew Samphan to respond. On the documents presented by the OCP in relation to the role of accused. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before starting my presentation, I'm supposed to give you two ERNs, document E3/5214, which is a statement by Soisen of the 1st of September 2008. I said in French was 0070291. In English, it's 0022551, and it continues on the next page. And in Khmer, 0022369, continuing on the following page. Before looking at certain documents that were presented by the co-prosecutors, in response to our own presentation, I would like to recall two things, because I believe that we were blamed for presenting documents related to the CPK policies. I would like to remind the Chamber, for purposes of the record, that the Chamber in its memo E315/2, paragraphs 3 and 4, subparagraph C, it has said that prevented the Kiew Samphan team to present documents relating to national policy at the hearing of the 28th of April 2015. And let me also remind the Chamber that Judge Laveng at 13 hours 50 and 31 seconds had said in answer to what Mr. Veken said at the time regarding the segment on the role of the accused and the policies regarding joint criminal enterprise, and as part of those policies, there were policies regarding cooperatives, end of quote. And that is the framework in which we made our presentation. Having made this clarification, the first document that was dealt with by the co-prosecutors regarding the statutes of CPK E3/214, I suppose that the co-prosecutor wanted to prove that in the statutes, reference was made to the Revolutionary Army and the divisions into three groups. This is an important point that should be recalled. The statutes of the CPK certainly existed, but in practice, the situation was different. And the most flagrant proof is that the Standing Committee, which was the essential committee of the CPK, as existed in democratic Cambodia, did not feature in that statute. And the military committee did not feature in it either. That was an important point that should have been pointed out. Another document presented by the co-prosecutors, or rather that was commented by the accusation, and we presented that document referring to the fact that Son Sen was in charge of military affairs. It is the record of the Standing Committee of the 15th of May 1976, document E3/222, and the co-prosecutors pointed out that it was important to note the presence of Kiew Samphan during a meeting regarding military affairs. What the co-prosecutors omitted to state was that on the agenda of that meeting, and the document E3/222, ERN in French is 003238892, and the ERN in Khmer 50770. That is 5 zeros. In English, 00182665, we should note that in addition to the military airport that was discussed on that day, the issue of factories was also discussed. And as part of the discussions on subsequent establishment of factory, it was stated, and I quote, meetings with diplomats and technicians, and we suppose that those diplomats was Chinese, but that wasn't specified in the document. So there was specific reference to diplomatic discussions that were related to the duties and responsibilities of Mr. Kyo Sampan. So let me give the ERNs I referred to, and the passage I quoted continues on the following pages in Khmer and in English. This is the quotation. On the political and diplomatic front, they agreed. But as regards the techniques, they raised obstacles and said that they had been there for 3 months, but that they hadn't seen any results. End of quote. And that discussion had to do with subsequent establishment of a factory. This was important to point out. I quoted that passage to explain why we suppose that they are talking of Chinese technicians, but be that as it may, it is important to mention that in relation to discussions held with a diplomatic and technical delegation. Another element which the co-prosecutors referred to in answer to the quotations from numerous revolutionary flags and youth magazines that I referred to, the co-prosecutors refer to the fact that, as a matter of fact, the Khmer Rouge treated people as cattle, and that that is something that came up in the practice of cooperatives. Let me point out that the reason why the Kyo Sampan team presented material from the Revolutionary Flag and the Youth Revolutionary magazine, since this is something that the prosecution is saying, in its case, saying that these are elements of propaganda and communication within the CPK, it was important to note what featured in the Revolutionary Flag magazines and the Revolutionary Youth magazines. It was important to know what was said as regards how cooperatives were to be managed and how the population was to be treated. And we find here that indeed there is a stark distinction between what the different witnesses told this chamber and what we find in the Revolutionary Flag magazine and the Revolutionary Youth magazine. It was important to point out that between the instructions and the practice, there was a gap, a wide gap, and we had to raise that point as part of the analysis of the policies of the CPK, and that there was a distinction between the practice and the policies or instructions is something that we shouldn't have difficulty pointing out, and that is something that we, the Kyo Sampan team, had to raise as a problem. And let me also refer to the fact that people were being referred to as the children and members of population that they didn't have an easy way of life. Document E3/742 is a document that was used by the co-prosecutors, and it refers to the different categorizations of various groups within cooperatives. Part wasn't quoted, and document E3/742 and the ERN in French is 00499-763, and the ERN in Khmer is 00062-997, and the ERN in English is 00478-506, and the ensuing part, and they talk about the full rights members of the cooperatives, the candidate members of cooperatives, and dismissed members of cooperatives. I believe that in Khmer the term dismissed can be interpreted differently, but whatever may be the case, the following paragraph reads as follows. Such clarification would enable us to have a political vision that is clear and precise. As such, it is possible to have a clear vision of the command. It is possible to have a vision of the organization of forces which is clear, the rallying of forces in a clear manner as well. Whether we're talking of persons, the problem of persons we can rely on, a problem with persons with whom you can act in solidarity, or a problem of persons who have to be seduced and drawn to oneself. And these are problems of the Committee of Cooperatives that should be designated. These problems have to be resolved according to the line of the party and class. So in this part, they are referring to rallying people and seducing people who had not yet joined the revolution. This distinction can be seen in that paragraph. Another point and another document which the co-prosecution quoted is document E3/918, and it is a telegram from a cadre from Preah-Vihear, in which the prosecution points out that mention is made of famine in that telegram, and that the center was therefore necessarily informed of it. Let me read the passage, and it's immediately after that quoted by the prosecution. ERN in French 006111725, that's in French. ERN in English 00182758, and the ERN in Khmer 0001062. And the sentence quoted by the prosecution: this year, generally in the Preah-Vihear region, most of the areas will endure famine. Explanation: as a matter of fact, during the production work, they transplanted rice only to obtain quantity without giving priority to quality, which was quite low. In fact, the cadres exaggerated the situation and deviated the line regarding production in the party. The party tried to grow rice on fertile land. However, the contrary happened. In fact, they asked the people to cultivate rice on land that wasn't fertile. It is important to point out that the region of Preah-Vihear has already been referred to before this chamber, and as well as the problems that the population may have faced. I would like to remind the chamber and refer the chamber and the parties to the hearing in case 001, witness Mivun on the 4th of October 2012, pointed out to the chamber under what conditions, under what circumstances he was called by Pol Pot to go precisely to that region, because we realized that there was a problem in the manner in which cooperatives were managed there. And I refer the chamber to that hearing so that the chamber may recall that the issues regarding Preah-Vihear had already been raised before this chamber. Another document which we should revisit, and it was quoted by the prosecution, is document E3/232, which is the minutes of a meeting of the Standing Committee of the 8th of March 1976. And I would like us to look particularly at points number 3 and 4, which provide relevant information, since that was a major issue relied on by the prosecution regarding the issue of imports. Let me point out again that this document enables us to see what was the purpose of those exports at the time. Another point that is also dealt with in that document is the issue of the veracity of documents sent to the center regarding quantities of paddy rice harvested and quantities of rice that could be sent to the center. That is document E3/232 in ERN in French 00232-935, ERN in English 00182633, and ERN in Khmer 0001721. So under subparagraph 3, titled as regards the harvesting of paddy rice, the second paragraph reads as follows: proposing exact figures of paddy harvest. When the hierarchy knows the figures, it will be easy to manage, on the one hand, the living conditions of the population, and on the other hand, to reflect on sales. We have to organize ourselves in order that people may know how to reflect and have plans, because we are no longer in a system of family production, because we are now talking of big production. And so we can no longer think in terms of small productions. So let us look at what is said in the previous paragraph, and it is relevant. We are talking of the region. Previously, Anchor had decided to take 1,000 tons. Now it's only 500 tons. This figure must be maintained at that location for the time being for reserves in case of shortages. And in this context, we have to look at the importance of proposing figures of exact paddy harvest. Otherwise, they won't be able to make good forecasts. Paragraph 4 of the same document, titled as regards living conditions of the population, this is what is stated. At this point in time, we are very much preoccupied with the living conditions of the population, but we are spending in order to purchase materials to improve the living conditions of the population, because we have to buy a lot of things, but we have very little capital. So we have to resolve the issue of living conditions of the population with very few resources in the villages. And now they talk about the issue of food rations. And this echoes what was said regarding the issue of exports and the problems that were central in democratic Cambodia. And they talked about industries and how to obtain things from abroad, things that were not available in Cambodia. So in this document, reference is made to the fact that they needed a lot of things, but they had very little capital.
Et ça nous ramène à préciser.
And that brings us to a statement which was partially cited by the prosecution, which was a document that we presented. It is Uko Vani's statement. As he was deceased, we couldn't call him as a witness. This is E3/5659. And I will be citing several passages of this document because it says many interesting things on the issue of false reports. As well as possible visits to the countryside and what was happening there. And the first passage is in document E3/5659. In French, the ERN is 00614-089. In Khmer, 00602-370. And in English, 00442658. In short, the intellectuals who worked at Phnom Penh didn't have any knowledge of the famine and executions taking place in the countryside. In 1976, we thought perhaps there were shortages in the countryside as we were eating gruel in Phnom Penh. But in 77 and 78, we thought it was going better because it was better in Phnom Penh, and specifically due to what they were saying on the radio. There were also articles with photographs in magazines. So we thought that all was well. Concerning the people in the party, it's difficult to say. They went to the countryside and they wrote reports when they came back. I don't know if they saw the real situation or if they told the truth to their higher-ups. It seemed that when the superiors within the party went to the countryside, the cadres at the local level cleaned things up, increased food, and hid people who were too thin or who were ill. We can't say, however, that the upper levels didn't know because there were examples of telling them how to manage things. For example, there was mentioned that there were not enough food for the mobile brigades, and the preparations weren't properly made for them. So when the mobile brigades arrived, there was nowhere for them to sleep, and also they didn't have enough. They weren't able to sleep enough, and they were therefore not able to work in the hottest part of the day or the night. End quote for this part. And then referring to the Revolutionary Youth and Revolutionary Flag articles, the criticisms of the cadres who were not taking good care of the needs of the people. That was not something they wanted people to see because it meant they weren't doing a good job at the level of the cooperatives. And I also want to point out that we have had witness statements in this chamber on the section of cooperatives where certain party members said that when there were visits from foreign delegations or delegations from the upper level superiors, they said for the people who were in good health to be in the front and to show themselves, and for the others to hang back. And this is also what Kovani said in his statement. Another point mentioned by Kovani, so that you say that I'm not holding back on information that's provided, is the next paragraph. So the same ERNs that I mentioned earlier, where she mentions Kyo Sampon, and she says, for example, in the case of Kyo Sampon, who said that we were able to solve the problem of hunger at one point, that if they had to stay at Phnom Penh as we did, he believed that was the case. It's possible that he didn't know. It's possible that he was lied to. On the other hand, if he went often to the countryside, he's lying. But I think that Kyo Sampon simply read the documents and considered that the figures sent to him were real, while in fact they were false figures. It's possible that the figures in these documents indicated that there was sufficient production and food in the countryside, while in fact this was not the case. Most of the statistics were false, very simply put. For example, the production figures for pharmaceutical factories were falsified, so they would lead people to believe that enough medicine had been produced, while this wasn't the case. Many people who worked on the statistics didn't know how to develop them, although some others did know, but they falsified them. And there I would like to refer to what several witnesses said about these false reports, specifically Stephanie Dorn's testimony, in which she also raised these points, and in Kovani's statement, where she also explains that the pharmaceutical section in which she worked had falsified figures. That's an important element. And on the potential movements of Kyo Sampon, we do have a Sihanouk's testimony that the prosecution referred to the last time, and specifically I would like to refer you to the document that was cited, E3/3113R, and then a small extract of Philip Short, and also E1168 Nine Chanda, rather E32376 Nine Chanda, and E39 Philip Short. And since we're talking about Samdeng Sihanouk's testimony, it's worth mentioning that on the same issue he mentioned his travel to the countryside with Kyo Sampon at a very specific time. I must send you back to what you've already heard in this chamber and what has already been presented here, and it was in the final conclusions, and you will remember that during the pleadings on the accountability of Kyo Sampon, there was an excerpt of an interview of Samdeng Sihanouk after he arrived in Paris. During an interview with French television, You will remember that we referred to this quote where he said he went to the countryside and didn't see anything in particular wrong. So when we refer to what Samdech Sihanouk said, we need to note that there were contradictory, diverse statements as a function of what he was wishing to highlight at the time. But I would like you to remember this broadcast of this interview with El Kabash, if I'm remembering correctly.
While you're at it, fall in the same place.
It was on the 25th of October, 2013, the summary conclusions hearing, and it was at roughly 11 o'clock. Judge Laverne, if I could also mention, it would be better if you didn't talk about someone who spoke in the previous trial. You spoke about that, but you didn't give us the reference of the transcript or the hearing. Counsel Gissi, it was Mivun. I'll come back in a short time with that reference. I'll finish and then I'll come back with that information just afterwards. Certain articles from several authors were also quoted by the prosecution. The prosecution mentioned a Stephen Hutter article E3/3169, which was published, and it's important to note the date, which was 1991. And for evidence of the date, I would like to send you to E3/3169 00002745 in English, and I don't know if there are other languages, but since it's about the date, I think that one ERN is enough. And it's a document which is a result of Stephen Hutter's university research, and it mentions specifically what I mentioned during my presentation of my own key documents, where I quoted another article of Stephen Hutter, but that he put at 2003 E3/4527, saying that what was problematic when we're quoting authors without giving the date or taking into account the elements that they have integrated since the beginning of their research is that we're only giving a portion of what they actually think and their conclusions. So the excerpt that I quoted of Stephen Hutter's article E3/4527, which comes quite later than the one quoted by the prosecution, and which had another title but began with a re-evaluation or reassessment. So that means between 1991 and 2003, Stephen Hutter had some changes in his thinking. And so therefore I refer you to this E3/4527, in which there was a lot of mentioning and talking about the literature from the Khmer Rouge era and instructions that were given to the cadres and the cooperatives. So that really needs to be emphasized in the context of articles by various authors. And next, the prosecution noted several articles well after the end of the Khmer Rouge regime, so 82, 87, 628, and 623. And there I will also send you back to articles that we have already mentioned and spoken about in this chamber. So when we're talking about press articles or interviews,
Council, please provide the EN number and the document numbers again, and please slow down for proper record and to ease the interpreters.
no problem. I was referring to certain interviews with Kyu Sompon, which were mentioned by the prosecution. E3/687, which is from 1982, E3/628 coming from 1980, and E3/203, which comes from 1980. And I was explaining that the context and manner in which things were presented at the time are not included, so that the context of the interview is not represented with the interviews at that time. So I'd like to note that in 1980 and 1982, from these various articles, there was a full-scale war going on with Vietnam. The Khmer Rouge were part of Democratic Kampuchea. They were along the border looking for allies, or the new allies. And we see that Samdech Sihanouk, once again, allied himself to the Khmer Rouge in that period. And to not put these statements in that context is to forget that at that particular time the idea of presenting a united front was important. It was certainly not the time to criticize the regime. I needed to particularly focus on E3/608, which was quoted by the prosecution when forgetting that we had also mentioned this document, and E3/608 is an interview attributed to Khieu Samphan in a magazine, Familia Cristiana. And it appears at the beginning of all of these documents, which were apparently given to Paola Gibonti, a journalist, but the Chamber will remember that this document was twice mentioned by François Panchaud during the trial 021, and there I'm talking about the 10th and 11th April 2013. And that was a PV1/179.1.1. And there's an indication by Mr. Panchaud. He said, "I don't think that this journal wrote the truth." The interview didn't cite any evidence, and that was a little bit before 15:15 and 30 seconds. And once again, he mentioned this on the 11th of April 2013. When he was questioned again, and this is what he indicates. So PVE 1/180.1. A little bit before 11:15 and 6 seconds, and Mr. Panchaud says, "I confirm. The Ferry Clan on that night told me I was always with Paola Brianti. This is false." End quote. So to present this document, while not mentioning that we've already discussed it, and that we have a witness who has told us twice during his testimony that it's a fake interview, it's important for the defense to really emphasize that. And finally, and I think that my time is up, I would like to say that Ying Tirit's interview by Madame Becker was used by the prosecution, and I did note that it was important to emphasize this point. I said that she had heard of Thu Seng for the first time in Cuba, and that she was quite shocked. Khieu Samphan was also quite shocked of it. And the prosecution said that this was the proof that Khieu Samphan was lying. I would like to refer to what Khieu Samphan said in E3/18, his work, in French, 00595-489, the ERN in English, 00103780, And then it continues on the next page. I don't know if I said the Khmer 003178. And this is what he says about S21. Sincerely, until very recently, I had a hard time recognizing the very brutal acts of the regime. There was much confusion fed by this paranoia of certain leaders and the power that intermediary cadres were given. And I think that I still think this is the root of the problem. But I want to say that I only became aware of the systematic repression very recently after the work of Sirinitan and S21. The fact that I didn't know about S21 is really a substantive problem, end quote. And then I would like to send you back to what was said by Ing Tirit during her interview with Becker, saying that she still thought that it was Vietnamese propaganda. That's what Mr. Kyosampon says in his work, is that it was only when he saw Sineri Sitipan's work that he found out about this. So just to be complete, Duik himself said in the hearing that the first time he saw Kyosampon was at the beginning of January 1979, on the eve of the time the Khmer Rouge fled the Vietnamese arrival. So now I will provide the reference for Mivun. I just would like to ask you for several seconds.
C'est donc à l'audience du 4 octobre.
So it's the 4 October 2012 hearing where Mivun, and you remember we talked about this for quite a long time, talks about the meeting with Pol Pot, where he said, I need to warn you, there are problems there. E1 130.1. And that is just after the part beginning at 14:02:15. And this is a discussion that already took place before the chamber, and I have finished, Mr. President.
Thank you, Counsel. The chamber would like to proceed with another agenda regarding the documents we received from the Professor Henoski, that is to TCW 946. And the chamber would like to hear responses from parties regarding the documents we received from the professor. On the 26th of December 2016, the chamber received a large box of photos from Professor Henoski to TCW 946, and some of the photos were very old or they were stacked together. Staff of the ECCC Archives Unit examined those photos and categorized them into three categories. That is, 1, photos that could be separated and could be scanned safely. 2, photos that could not be separated entirely but could be opened and could be photographed page by page. And 3, photos which are very old or stuck together and could not be separated and that could not be scanned or photographed. Besides the photos in the box, there is also an original biography of a detainee at S21 Security Center. At present, the Archives Unit included the scanned or photographed photos into the share material drive, and parties could view those photos via linked into the emails that the chamber sends to the parties. At present, the Chamber wishes to hear oral responses from parties if you wish to request for the admission of those documents pursuant to Rule 87.4. And first, I hand the floor to the co-prosecutors.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, we would request that the scanned photos be admitted into evidence. It's very difficult to say how many of those photos are duplicates of photos that are already on the case file. We did note in a preliminary review that about 130 of the photographs have names written on the photograph that are visible. And I think the evidence is that this was a practice that happened later in the regime. In a preliminary search that we did of those names, and I emphasize preliminary because there's always issues of handwriting and spelling of names, it appears that 36 of those names do not appear on the OCIJ list. So it's very possible that these are the only evidence of these individuals, these 36 or so individuals' entry into S21 is from these photographs. Of course, other photographs already on the case file, it's clear that no one has ever looked the names of those on those photographs in order to compile a list and include that in the OCIJ list either. But we do think that some of this could be unique evidence. Other photographs, for example, there's the photograph of the individual from San Diego, California, Chris DeLance, I believe is his name. And we've seen the photograph before from about the neck up, and the photograph, for some reason, in the Hadowski material that's been scanned shows the full body. So it appears to be more information than we had previously. So while clearly there's probably are many duplicates photographs in that group, it'd be very difficult to separate them out now, so we suggest that all be admitted.
Thank you. And the floor now is for the political lawyers for civil parties.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. We support the entry into evidence of these documents. We would like to verify the names which appear on the panels of the photos to see if the names correspond with any of the relatives of the civil parties corresponding with the documents that we have. So we also are using these photographs and carrying out the necessary verifications. So we would like these photographs to be admitted into the case file.
Thank you. And the floor is now given to the defense team for Nuon Chia.
Yes, Mr. President. Of course, we have no objection if these photos will be admitted into evidence. There are various collections, notably the most recent adding of photos, I believe sometime in 2016. It is indeed the case that there are quite some duplicates. We are still in the process of identifying the photos. Up until now, we have found or identified 31 photos which are already in E3/8639, but adding these photos and giving these photos a distinct E3 number, of course, that would make sense in the light of the earlier decisions in respect of the photographs.
Thank you. And lastly, the floor is given to the defense team for Kieu Sampon. Thank you, Mr. President. For the defense team for Kieu Sampon, we do not object to the admission of this document or photos. President, the Chamber would like to thank the parties for the request to admit the photos that the Chamber has just received from the Professor to TCW 946, and no party objects to these requests. The Chamber will consider these submissions and issue our decision in due course. It is now convenient for today's adjournment, and we will resume it tomorrow, that is Wednesday, 11 January 2017, commencing from 9 o'clock in the morning. And for tomorrow proceedings, the Chamber will hear oral submissions from parties on the remaining charges in case 002. So parties, please be advised. I noticed that Counsel Guichet is on her feet. You may proceed.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, je suis désolée.
Yes, Mr. President, I'm sorry. I should have responded a bit earlier since we're on the issue of photos. We sent an email on behalf of the Kyo Sampan team to raise the issue of photos that were taken upon the opening of the box containing this famous orange logbook that was recently entered into evidence by the Chamber, and we would like to note that because the photos were taken by CMS, I believe, at the time the box was opened. I'll go a bit slower. We would like, therefore, for the photos that were taken by CMS at the time of receipt and opening of the box of the orange logbook that was admitted into evidence and was also sent by the German professor to be also admitted into evidence. We believe these photos should also be admitted into evidence because there were also staples that had fallen out. At the time the register was received, and so therefore they're not visible when we simply look at the logbook itself, just the scans of that logbook. So these photos show that there had been staples in the documents that had fallen out, that held together the register, the logbook. And these photos taken by CMS allow us to have a broader vision, a better understanding of the logbook that was admitted into evidence. So I think if we can add the pictures taken at the time of the opening of the box, that would be useful to better understand when we're looking at these documents.
Judge Laverne, you have the floor.
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Counsel Guichet, can you give us any details that can enable us to identify the photographs you are referring to? Because I do remember photographs taken during the opening of the boxes, but those were not the boxes containing the orange register, but they contained photographs that were sent recently, so I do not know quite exactly what you are referring to. Counsel Guichet, it's very difficult for me to describe it, but for all the parties and the persons who are able to go and consult the register with the CMS, I think the CMS did well in opening the boxes that contained the register. They proceeded in the same way as they had done with the box of photographs. They did the same for the orange register at CMS. They took photographs of the box containing the register, and as they did so, some stapling pins dropped. And this is the same procedure they used when they opened the boxes containing the photographs. This is something we only observed when we went to consult the original document at CMS. These are elements that we saw in the hard copy versions of the documents when we went to consult CMS documents. So for the purposes of transparency, it is important that we should also tender into evidence the photographs taken during the opening of the box containing the yellow register, as they did in the case of the box containing the photographs. Thank you for this clarification, because I am not sure the other parties understood what you were referring to, particularly since you were talking of documents that you saw only when you went to consult the famous orange register. I do not know whether the parties will have more time to gain access to those photographs, or whether they want to do so immediately.
I'm sure that I understood it correctly. The only thing you're asking for is photographs taken by CMS of the orange logbook. Because the word photos, I think, is a bit misleading, because there were also photos in patches that were sent. But you are talking of photographs taken by CMS of the orange logbook, nothing else.
C'est ça, Madame le juge.
That is it, Honorable Judge Fence. I'm talking of photographs of the orange logbook and the materials that accompanied the logbook. I'm talking of stapling pins that fell, showing that some documents were stapled before they were bound together in that logbook. We've seen that the logbook was something that was bound, so it's important for us to know what was the original material of the logbook before the stapling pins fell off.
There was this page was the logbook and a couple of loose pages, which had nothing to do with the logbook. So again, you are only talking about photos taken of the logbook, not of the accompanying batch of, probably, as far as we know, we don't know yet, unrelated loose pieces of paper.
Moi, ce dont je parle...
What I am talking of, and perhaps I'll have to go back to you and ask CMS to show you copies of the photographs. Perhaps the chamber can approach CMS in order to find out what photographs I'm referring to and share them with all the parties. These photographs show that they were opening the register and there were pages in the logbook. I see you are saying no, Judge Laveng. I don't know why you are saying so, Judge Laveng. I think the best thing for us to do is to disclose the photographs so that we can see exactly what they are. For the time being, we are making assumptions as to the contents of the orange logbook. I believe that there is one part of the logbook that parties have access to, and you must have noticed that at the same location, however, there were other documents that were indeed bound together with stapling pins. Those documents have not been ruled admissible. Those documents were given to the Tuol Sleng Museum for purposes of conservation. I think to mix up the two and to say immediately that those documents were part of the orange logbook is perhaps presumptuous. Councillor Gise, I am only talking about what I saw, and perhaps we should ask CMS to circulate the photographs and to tell us exactly what was the contents of the box. That would enable us to clarify matters a bit more.
International Co-Prosecutor, do you have the floor?
We would not object to the photographs being admitted, should Your Honors find any relevance.
And what about the lead co-lawyer for civil parties?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. We, for our part, did not see the photographs when we went to consult the logbook. Those photographs were not shown to us by the archives unit. If the chamber were to consider that those photographs are relevant, they could be annexed to your memo, E444/2, in which you explain the different contacts and the manner in which you contacted Professor Leonoski, and you could annex that to the memo if you deem that necessary.
And what about the Defense Counsel for Nuon Chea regarding this last request proposed by the Defense Counsel for Khieu Samphan?
We have no observations, Mr. President.
Thank you. And the Chamber will consider this issue and how to deal with it, or we would make our joint oral ruling on the issue. And again, the Chamber will resume tomorrow, and tomorrow the Chamber will hear oral submissions from parties on the remaining charges in case 002. So parties, please be informed. Security personnel, you are instructed to take the two accused, Nuon Chea and Khieu Samphan, back to the detention facility and have them return to attend the proceedings tomorrow morning before 9 o'clock. The court is now adjourned.
Sure.